White millionaire said, "I don't have time for you." 3 days later, she begged him to save her son. What happens when a black doctor from Brooklyn saves the life of a millionaire's son, the same woman who dismissed him just days earlier? You won't believe how his truth flipped, not just her world, but the entire nation. What happened next left Congress in absolute silence. If Marcus Simon had ever been the kind of man who rushed through life, he might have had his own clinic by now. A fancy one. With marble floors and an espresso machine nobody knew how to work except the intern with a trust fund. But Marcus? He didn't move like that. No, Marcus was built for stillness and storm alike. He was deliberate, a man who looked twice before speaking once. And when he did speak, you'd remember. Especially if you were the kind of white woman in a blazer that cost more than 3 months' rent in South Bronx. Especially if you believed the word please was reserved for waitstaff and prayer. He saw her from about 20 meters away. She dropped her wallet with the grace of someone used to being picked up after, like it was part of her morning routine. Most folks just kept walking, rushed right past it. Not Marcus. He didn't even hesitate. He picked up the wallet, leather, Cartier. And yes, Marcus knew the brand, even if the watch on his wrist came from a bodega display next to gum and keychains. He caught up with her, tapped her lightly on the shoulder and said, "Ma'am, you dropped this." She turned. For a split second, her face flickered with something, surprise, irritation, like he'd interrupted a divine Zoom call with the heavens. She took the wallet, nodded the way a machine does when your card is approved, and said the words that sliced the air like dull scissors. "Thank you, but I don't have time for you." Every organ in Marcus's body, even the ones the textbooks say shouldn't react, stood at attention. But he didn't say a word, didn't roll his eyes, didn't curse under his breath, just stood there, gripping the strap of his beat-up backpack, holding on to whatever shreds of dignity he hadn't already watched the city erode. She climbed into her Uber Black, the kind of car that appeared when you ordered it with an executive account, and she was gone. A small card fluttered to the ground when she climbed in, probably slipped from the wallet earlier. Marcus picked it up without looking, slid it into his pocket. Later, in the dim light of the clinic's break room, he'd read the name. Emma Lawrence, CEO. Lawrence Biotech. Oh, her. The biotech goddess Forbes couldn't shut up about. The woman with a Nobel nomination and a penthouse balcony from which, if you believed the press, she practically cured cancer with essential oils and datasets. That night, Marcus went home, if you could call it that. It was a one-bedroom walk-up above a greasy auto shop, a place where engine smoke got into your curtains and never left. But he had one luxury, an old laptop that booted on the 5th try, and a newsfeed subscription he kept like a lifeline. That's when he saw it. Son of Lawrence Biotech CEO hospitalized after rare complication from experimental vaccine. Oliver, that was the boy's name. And Marcus recognized him instantly, not from the photo, but from memory. That boy had once walked into Marcus's free clinic, flanked by a nanny who looked like she'd taken a wrong turn into a different tax bracket. The kid had tremors, fear in his eyes, and a kind of quiet only children who've learned not to speak carry around like armor. Marcus had offered help, a full checkup, free of charge. All she had to do was sign a form. She said, "We have better specialists," then turned on her heel like the hallway was beneath her. Yeah, she'd been in a hurry that day too. The next day around noon, the clinic's front door burst open like Judgment Day in Prada. Emma Lawrence stormed in, and every head in the waiting room turned. Even Mary at the front desk, who once worked through an asthma attack like it was just Tuesday, dropped her pen. "I need Marcus Simon," Emma said, voice breaking. "They told me only he can understand what's happening to my son. Please." Marcus was behind the frosted glass of the triage room. He heard her, heard that please hang in the air, like it just learned what humility felt like. He stood still for a moment, not out of hesitation, but calculation. Because some words hit different depending on who says them. And some come too late. He stepped into the hallway, calm, clean white coat, face unreadable. Their eyes met, and for the first time, hers weren't looking down. They were looking up, desperate, panicked. "He doesn't just need medicine," Marcus said, his voice even. "He needs his mother to start listening." "I'll pay," she said. Her voice cracked. "Whatever it costs." Marcus laughed, but not the joyful kind. It was dry, edged with something bitter. The kind of laugh that only comes after years of swallowing things you shouldn't have had to taste in the first place. "This ain't about money, Ms. Lawrence. It's about time. And if I recall, you didn't have any for me last week." He agreed to help. Not for her, for the boy. 3 hours later, he was in one of the most expensive private clinics in the state, the kind where they serve mineral water in the stemless crystal, and the air smells like money disinfected twice for good measure. Emma briefed the room, voice shaking, while Marcus reviewed scans, charts, and neurological profiles. 3 doctors stood against the wall, spotless coats, smug faces, like they'd been told to smile for the shareholders, but frown at the help. One leaned over to whisper, "Who is this guy?" "He's the volunteer from the Bronx clinic," another said. "No, seriously, is he some activist?" The third one said it low. "No, that's Marcus Simon, Army medic, served in Iraq, decorated." Silence, because that's when they realized this wasn't someone they could out-degree or out-talk. This was someone who had pulled bodies out of burning convoys and reattached arteries in dust storms. Marcus stayed with Oliver for 6 hours straight, longer than any of them had. While the high-priced team ran numbers and played email tag with pharma reps, he was doing what medicine is supposed to be. He was paying attention to the tremors, to the breathing, to the way the kid's eyes fluttered when someone said his name too loud. He saw what others didn't, not because he had better tools, but because he actually looked and listened and remembered a case from years ago, a soldier's son with the same rare mutation, the same reactions to protein-based neuroadaptive compounds. And just like that, it clicked. It wasn't the vaccine. It was how the body processed it, how this kid's brain was wired. The kind of thing no algorithm would catch, but a real doctor could. When he was done, Marcus stepped into the hallway and sat down on the bench. His back was tight, his hands ached, but his mind was clear. Emma sat beside him, pale, silent. Not the CEO now, just a mother. "Will he be okay?" she asked. Marcus looked at her, hard. "You want me to save the son of the woman who, last Friday, couldn't even spare a moment to say thank you?" Her eyes dropped, and he wasn't finished. "Let me make something real clear, Ms. Lawrence. If that boy lives, it won't be because of your system. It'll be because someone you didn't even bother to see refused to be as careless as you." 3 days after the tense showdown in those antiseptic corridors of Lawrence Biotech, Marcus Simon's name was reverberating through every news feed and cable network like a headline-grabbing album drop. Only this was no entertainment spectacle. It was raw truth broadcast in medical terminology, and the shockwaves were not orchestrated by PR teams, but ignited by someone who never asked for attention in the first place. Marcus wasn't chasing this either. He didn't pitch himself to host or choreograph his soundbite. He simply stood firm on the facts, dared to call out the industry's richest, and watched as his words turned into tremors in every boardroom that relied on silence as currency. The moment felt both surreal and righteous, because suddenly, the man who once saved lives in battlefield trenches and quiet clinics was commanding more visibility than any celebrity, not for glory, but for not staying silent. It all began with a simple yet seismic interview. Marcus had insisted he wasn't a media figure, that he was a healer first and foremost, someone who pulled people out of crises rather than performed for cameras. But when CNN got hold of that flash drive, containing internal emails, meeting minutes, trial data from Lawrence Biotech, and an accompanying statement from Emma Lawrence herself that said, "I'm ready to speak, thanks to the man who wouldn't walk away from my son," the narrative shifted irrevocably. Silence was no longer an option. This wasn't orchestrated drama, it was accountability, and the audience sensed the difference. At precisely 8 p.m., prime time, the hour when families settle into sofas waiting for real stories, Marcus stepped into view. Not glamorized, not coached, but in a suit that looked like it had been pulled off a rack and shoved in the shower the night before, because appearance hardly mattered next to truth. His voice was steady, deliberate, and completely unscripted as he looked into the camera and said, "My name is Marcus Simon, and I'm not here to chase headlines. I'm here because I'm sick and tired of my community being dismissed with medical jargon and excuses, while lives are reduced to inconvenient anomalies rather than treated with the urgency they deserve." He didn't mince words, he didn't apologize. He spoke like a man who had never been invisible, just repeatedly undervalued, too dark to be believed, too polite to challenge, too capable to be trusted. When Emma's son arrived, I didn't care whose child he was. I cared that his symptoms matched those of children whose parents lived paycheck to paycheck, who signed consents without truly understanding them, because that's what doctors say. The only real difference was the name on the insurance card and the cost of ignoring it. For once, studio cameras didn't cut away. For once, anchors listened instead of steering. This wasn't showmanship, it was conviction. And conviction, delivered with clarity and strength, can quiet even the most restless audience. And what happened after that broadcast wasn't panic, it was upheaval. Not for Marcus, but for the people who once thought they held all the power. The board members, investors, and judgment-heavy investors, who suddenly found themselves scrambling to patch cracks in a reputation built on half-truths. But Marcus, he slipped right back into his clinic. No red carpet, no PR crew, just a waiting room filled with everyday people. Grandmothers on income assistance, Exhausted single moms juggling jobs, nurses clocking extra hours just to keep the lights on. That's where something real began to take shape. One morning before the sun had fully risen, a battered yellow school bus pulled up outside the narrow clinic entrance. Not a luxury vehicle, but a vehicle of intervention in its own right. Out stepped 20-plus children, some with visible signs of struggle, others carrying fatigue like a second skin, and alongside them, parents clutching binders of medical reports, photos, audio recordings. These were former trial participants, people whose lives had quietly been part of Lorentz testing, until Marcus's revelations lifted the lid on something bigger. And when they emerged, they weren't looking for celebrity. They were looking for justice, recognition, conversation. Their voices were humble but determined, carrying the collective story of communities who had long been sidelined in sterile research rooms. One mother stepped forward, her voice steady though her hands trembled as she spoke to Marcus, eyes never wavering. "My son started speaking again after what you said, after the world heard. We thought he'd lost himself completely, but your words gave us the courage to dig deeper, to find another doctor who listened. He's back, and we'll never forget that." In that moment, the clinic, once cramped, humming with AC units that rattled like protest chants, became a stage of reckoning. No charts, no PowerPoints, just real faces and real consequences. These weren't case files, they were lives. And Marcus stood in their midst, not as some glorified hero, but as a witness, someone whose presence mattered because he heard them. He heard the sighs of parents who spent nights awake, wondering what they'd agreed to. He heard the quiet gratitude in the children's eyes. He heard the silence that followed, a silence that spoke louder than any apology ever could. Meanwhile, across town in a stark, committee-lined hearing room, Emma Lorentz took her seat, not in a designer suit, but in something as simple as a plain blouse and honest intent under oath. She faced pointed questions. Did your company conduct trials without full ethical compliance? Yes. Did you know parents didn't comprehend what they signed? Yes. And why did you stay silent? Her voice faltered. She swallowed hard, then answered with transparency that cut deeper than any press release. Because I was afraid, and I'm afraid now. Afraid that without Marcus Simon stepping in, my son would have been buried under corporate earnings, and I would have been the CEO of a company that quietly caused harm, not with weapons or cameras, but with silence and complexity. It wasn't defeat, it was accountability, and it resonated across microphones and live streams, exposing the raw truth that power often hides behind protocols, but humanity can only be hidden for so long. Congress listened, a moment of collective stillness folding over the hearing room, like a prayer unanswered until that moment. 6 months later, the foundation Marcus envisioned was no longer a proposal. It was an active force in the world, called Voices Not Silenced. It wasn't named for him, but for those it honored. People previously sidelined, their stories overlooked. It funded clinics in neighborhoods that had been written off, covered diagnostics that insurance wouldn't touch, and awarded scholarships to young Black medical professionals who aspired not just to treat symptoms, but to restore dignity. Those clinics focused not merely on prescriptions, but on presence, doctors being taught to ask not just what ails you, but how does your story affect your body? Empathy became part of the curriculum, and listening became an unspoken requirement. No condescension, no pity, just the kind of respect so rarely extended when privilege had the privilege of choice. The final scene unfolded in a school auditorium lit by fluorescent lights, folding chairs arranged around a stage that whispered of countless other ceremonies. A tall teenager, almost a man, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, approached the microphone. His voice was steady but bright with conviction as he said, "I don't remember everything from back then," he began, voice reverberating in that simple space. "But I remember a man, someone I barely knew, who held my hand and said, 'You're not a project, you're a person.' And I want to be a doctor like him, not just to heal bodies, but to heal souls." Behind him in the front row, Marcus rose without fanfare. No flash bulbs popped and no reporters filed in. Just quiet, silent applause of hearts moved beyond camera lenses. He offered a slow, genuine smile, soft and unplanned, because in that moment, the work wasn't done for show. It was done for truth. Here's the truth no PR firm can spin. You don't need credentials or headlines to reshape lives. Sometimes all you need is the conviction to look, to listen, to say, "I see you." And when you do it long enough, truth doesn't just emerge, it transforms. Not for the powerful, but for the powerless. Not for the boardrooms, but for the people who walk through yellow bus doors carrying their stories. In the end, it wasn't contracts, directives, or market caps that changed the system. It was a whisper turned into a roar. I won't stay silent. And that kind of power is unstoppable. 3 days after the sterile showdowns in those glass-walled labs at Lawrence Biotech, the name Marcus Simon was echoing through the airwaves louder than any double album drop. Only instead of bass drops, there were medical terms. Instead of music videos, there were streaming interviews on every major news network, and most shockingly, he did not chase it. He did not crave the limelight, nor did he file publicist requests. No, he simply became the man who dared speak truth to people accustomed to paying to keep their voices quiet. It all began with one interview. Marcus said he didn't want it. Seriously. He said, "I'm not a media personality. I'm a doctor. I'm used to pulling people out of hell, not giving a primetime performance." Yet when a flash drive with internal trial protocols from Lawrence Biotech landed at CNN's desk and came accompanied by a statement from Emma Lawrence herself saying, "I am ready to speak. Thanks to the man who didn't walk away from my son," it became painfully clear that silence was no longer an option. So at 8 p.m., prime time, the sacred hour when America sits down with its dinner plate expecting something real, reality showed up. There was Marcus, in a suit that looked like it was hung in the shower the night before, voice calm and unfiltered. Not a drop of puffery. He said, "My name is Marcus Simon. I'm not here for glory, but I am tired. Tired of watching my community suffer from what's sugar-coated as unfortunate medical events, when in truth we were simply never in the priority list." He spoke plainly. No corporate scripts, no PR disclaimers. He spoke like a man who had lived his whole life under the microscope of suspicion. Too dark to be a doctor, too polite to be sincere, too smart to be left alone. Yet here he was, living proof that irony cuts deeper than misinformation. He continued, voice steady but grave. "When Emma Lawrence's son was rushed to me, I didn't know whose child he was. I only knew that he had the same symptoms as kids whose parents live in trailers, eat boxed pasta 3 times a day, sign papers because the doctor said so, and never see a courtroom. The only difference was the name, Lawrence, and the price tag on the insurance policy." At that moment, the studio lights seemed to pause, time filtering years of spin and PR out of the room. Even the anchor woman, who had covered enough headline chases to recognize a viral moment when she saw one, sat quiet. Because what unfolded on that set was neither performance nor pitch. It was revelation. It was indictment. After the broadcast aired, panic didn't come to Marcus. It rippled through boardrooms, brokerages, and insider chat rooms that managed the futures of biotech stocks. Teams were scrambling to spin, to strategize, to extinguish a flame they had helped ignite. Marcus? He walked right back to his old clinic, the one packed with hard-working grandmothers, single mothers juggling shifts, nurses grinding through double hours. That was home. That was reality. And in that humble air conditioner screeching space, where the AC rattled with the same rhythm as the patient's stories, the real aftermath began. One morning, before the doors even opened, a beat-up school bus rolled up. Not a limo or press entourage, but a bus with peeling paint and a worn sign that said Yellowstone Elementary, or whatever local school feeds the neighborhood. Out climbed 20 or so children, each clutching their diagnosis notes, once test subjects in Lawrence's trials. They were flanked by parents, some with clipboards, others holding homemade signs, all wearing eyes that held stories deeper than any FDA briefing. Marcus stood up, straight back, as the bus hissed its brakes and came to a stop in front of the lacquered door. One by one, families stepped forward, claiming space at the clinic door, not to treat, but to bear witness. A mother, her voice quiet but firm, stood in front. "My son, thanks to your honesty, started speaking again. We thought he had shut down forever, but when you spoke of side effects we didn't know existed, we found help. We found answers we never would have if someone hadn't dared to say what was hidden." She pressed a folder into Marcus's hand, a folder full of test results, follow-up scans, personal notes, evidence they collected because no corporation would grant them clarity. They came not for her celebrity, but for a voice of accountability. A man who stood not as savior, but as witness, whose job wasn't just to heal bodies, but to testify for overlooked lives. They came to say that Black children deserve attention, that poor mothers deserve explanations, and that the days when lives were used as quiet statistics were over. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, across glass windows in an echoing hearing room of Congress, Emma Lawrence, no longer in a Dior suit, sat in a plain blouse, eyes honest, shoulders unguarded. Under oath, she faced questions the world had been asking. Did your company conduct trials that violated ethical standards? Yes. Did you know children were enrolled whose parents didn't understand the risks? Yes. Why did you remain silent? This time she paused, and when she spoke, it wasn't PR spin, it was truth. Because I was afraid, and now I'm afraid of a deeper truth, that without Marcus Simon stepping in, my son would be dead, and I'd still be the CEO of a company quietly harming children. Not with bullets, not with cameras, but by ignoring their voices. It was not surrender. It was confession. It was humanity in real time. A boardroom had become a confessional, and the nation listened. Not for intrigue, but for moral coming of age. In the 6 months that followed, the foundation Marcus proposed took shape, not under his name, but under a banner calling out its mission as loudly as its purpose. Voices not silenced. It funded clinics in under-resourced neighborhoods, covered critical diagnostics that used to be too expensive, and provided scholarships to young Black medics aspiring to heal more than illness, to restore dignity. And yes, those clinics did more than treat bodies. They taught doctors to listen, to ask not just, "What's wrong with you?" but "What story does your body carry?" The heartbeat of medicine was placed back into human connection, and not once did that mission carry the stench of pity. It carried respect. The final scene took place in a school auditorium punched with fluorescent lights and folding chairs. Nothing fancy, perfect for a certificate ceremony. A tall teenager, frame lanky, glasses perched like old souls do, stepped up to the mic. He cleared his throat, voice steady despite nerves, and said, "I don't remember everything from back then, but I remember a man, someone I barely knew, holding my hand and saying, 'You are not a project, you are a person.' And I want to be a doctor like him, not just to save lives, but to hear them." From the front row, Marcus rose. No flashbulbs, no applause from a press pit, just quiet, the kind that means this matters. He smiled at the kid, pride in his eyes without a word, because the real victory happened long ago. In the moment, a voice refused to be ignored. Because let's make this clear. You don't need PhDs or fame to save a life. All you need sometimes is the guts to not walk past someone suffering because their story doesn't fit the narrative you want to hear. You need someone who stands up and says, "I see you. I hear you." And if you do that long enough, transformation becomes inevitable. Because the truth once spoken doesn't stay buried for long. And maybe that's the best part. The truth doesn't need power. The truth makes power.